Today we're going to be continuing with our discipleship series. We're kind of picking back up. I know we took some time to talk about Jesus and Advent. We took some time to have some really great chili and hang out and have a chili cook-off. Where's Sandy? We'll give her a victory lap. We can clap for her. She took first place with an amazing chili, and there was not a bad chili in the batch. It was all very good, so you guys represented well. So we are back at it at the beginning of the year. Happy New Year's, Merry Christmas, all that stuff. I feel like just now kind of coming down off of the busyness and just the rush of all the different holidays and stuff. So we're going to take this time to re-engage with the discipleship series and where we were at. So I'll have Jake and John come up here. They can sit awkwardly while I start. Yep. Yeah, you do. Oh, man. So I just wanted to talk a little bit. So we are, like I said, we've been talking about discipleship. We've been talking about discipleship and different things from a philosophical angle. We've been given good tools, resources, ways to think, ways to approach discipleship. We had a really cool interview a couple weeks ago, last month, with Dan and Les. Dan's here somewhere. Maybe he's back with the kids. It was really great. We talked to them, and they were sharing they shared a lot about groups, and they shared a lot about personal discipleship, like where you're meeting one-on-one or one with a few people, and that's a really great way of understanding discipleship. But today, what we want to focus in on is discipleship that happens in the context of a microchurch. So that is a group where, the discipleship's happening from all kinds of angles. The leader's discipling the group's discipling itself, the Holy Spirit in the Bible is discipling the group. I mean, it's just you blend all that up, and everyone's being led by various factors and different influences in that, all pointing towards Jesus. So we want to take some time today and talk and learn about discipleship in a microchurch context and how you step into that role of being a microchurch leader through what we call apprenticeship. So we got John and Jake here, and we're going to ask them some questions about being an apprentice and being a microchurch leader and kind of how that went for them. And before we do that, I just wanted to say a couple things about, just set the stage for what do we mean when we talk about like apprenticeship. And, you could hear that and think like this is some flashy title or some cool trendy thing. But for us, it's like the most functional title we can think of for what it actually is. So it's not like, oh, it's so cool to like do this thing, do this program, be this thing, but it's really like, what does an apprentice do? Well, it learns after somebody who's doing the thing that they want to do. They come alongside them and learn the best they can. So basically, if you want to be a microchurch leader someday within our network, and you want to do that with us, you want to journey together and be part of the MVVC network of microchurches, our way of stepping into that role is what we've been saying, what we call apprenticeship. And that means is you basically just, you meet up, you journey alongside a current leader, and you work with them, and they work with you. You're kind of like yoked together in that leading kind of role. Like you're doing the work together, you're learning from one another. In the way, it's a crude farm analogy, but if you yoke oxen together, you could take one who's been doing it a long time, and that's how a new one learns how to do the work that it's supposed to do. It's very crude, and it stops there. If I keep going with that analogy, it just sounds not good. But it's the process of learning from a current leader and letting them rub off on you, learning from how they do the things that they do. And beyond just learning what they do through apprenticeship stuff, you also grow in the ways that you personally are networked together with other leaders in the church. You're oftentimes coming to leaders gatherings. You're having discussions at that level with different people in our network. So important relationships develop at the leadership level through apprenticeship, which is a big deal of we are trying to be decentralized as a network of microchurches. So it makes those relational connections really important, and that's a really good time and window to develop some of those with other leaders within the network. Doing apprenticeship also allows you to pick up on the culture of our church. You're learning from somebody who's existing in that culture, and it helps you more than just experience it. It helps you learn it in a way where you can carry it and share that with other people. So those are just a couple things about how we see apprenticeship benefiting you as you try to step into that role of being a microchurch leader. And, how long would it take to be an apprentice? I think it varies depending on where you're starting. You can't just have a cookie-cutter leadership development track and just hope that it works for everybody. For some people, it might be a long time. Some people it might be a short time. But it's at least a couple months to, if you meet all the time, maybe less. But if you're meeting once a week, that gives you, at least some time. If you're trying to think through, I want to start a microchurch maybe in the fall, it's maybe now's a good time to start thinking about coming alongside a leader and seeing kind of what ways they'd want to help you. But the amount of total time that it takes isn't as important as, are you ready to become a microchurch leader by the end of the process? And what we want to offer is not a curriculum that says, well, it doesn't matter if you've ever led a group before, it doesn't matter if you know our culture, it doesn't matter. You just go through this class and you come out with a certificate and now you're a leader. And it's the curriculum develops you. It's no, we want to give you a person who actually is doing the thing that you want to do. And we want to give some good content that helps. But largely, we want to provide a person. And that seems pretty biblical to us. The way discipleship happened, the ways that leaders seem to be raised up when we look at Scripture. Which frees, when we have some content to kind of help, that frees you up as a microchurch leader if you have an apprentice to just focus on, okay, here's how I do what I do. Here's how I approach gatherings. Here's how, maybe we reach out to people when they're not here. You're just teaching all the nuances of the craft of how to help that culture be experienced in your group. So does that make sense? Just a couple things about apprenticeship. I know it can be kind of vague, but that comes with the territory of being highly relational and less programmatic. It's there's all kinds of different things it could be depending on the need for the person. So why don't you guys just take a second, introduce yourselves, and why don't you just share when your apprenticeship stuff began, and I'll put this mic on while you guys do that.
Okay. Hi, I'm John. Thank you. I'm trying to think when we...
yeah, I know, that's why I asked you to go.
When it started. Yeah. I remember about this time last year, in November, December, just there was kind of just a shift that God put in me. And I remember even at one point Jake saying hey, would you want to lead a microchurch, or do you want to lead a microchurch? And God just did a shift in me where it's I think I do want to do that. And then it came to figuring out, who do I apprentice with, and was just praying with that because I go to a couple microchurches, and then just felt like God leading to pair up with Jake, and Cameron was in the mix of helping figure that out. And and so I don't know if we'd already been talking about it, and so just kind of making it formal. Okay, I'm gonna start apprenticing, and we'll meet together 1 or 2 times a month to do that apprenticeship process. In addition to actually being at the microchurch's weekly meeting.
I'm Jake. Beth and I lead a microchurch in New Concord. So we've been doing that for several years. But yeah, it's really neat. There's a kind of a story behind it, how John, we've talked about it before, and John was always I don't know if I want to lead. I don't want to take that step. But there was a really very visible shift. And John just asked, hey, can you pray for a couple to connect with, to help lead with? Because he didn't want to just go off and be by himself. I think that was the community is very much a part of who John is. And so I said, yeah, I don't have any answers, but I'll pray with you. And so starting in December, I actually have a prayer list on my phone on the Bible app. Who all uses the Bible app? Yeah, there's a prayer spot in it. I don't know if you've been to the prayer area, but there's guided prayers, and then you can add your own prayer lists. which is pretty cool. So it's good for me to keep track of those kind of things. So I actually put a date down that I started praying, and so every time, every day, it was just constant that I'd pray for John to match up with someone, some couple. And then several months later, this Alpha thing started, and I think that was an answer to prayer, and John was a part of that. And then after that, it was like, well, maybe this a group could start. Microchurch could start out of Alpha. And so it's just it's beautiful how God kind of put that all together to where it's kind of an answer to that process. Yeah. But yeah, we've been apprenticing. I forget that date.
June. I just
June.
looked it
Thank
up.
you for looking that up.
Yep.
Looks like we're unprepared. It's my fault.
That's all right. I was trying to come up with a tricky question. So.
Yeah, it's all right. So yeah,
Stumped you
June.
early
And so what that looked like, it was, John just said, hey, let's start. And we started apprenticing. So cool.
Cool. So I think you teed this up nicely. My first question is for John. Share about your journey to becoming an apprentice. Like, have you always dreamed of becoming an apprentice? I can only imagine that's... You'd write in journals, John Linton, Microchurch apprentice.
One day I want to be an
school.
apprentice. I think for me, it was when we first started doing the microchurch leaders and the apprentices. First, it was very much, I had conflicting feelings about it. There was a yes and a no. And I think at the beginning, it was like, oh, I'm supposed to want to be an apprentice because I want to be on board with God's mission and our church's mission and multiplying microchurches. And so it was like, I should want to be an apprentice and do that. And I often will have a tendency, it's like I just kind of want to rush right into the process. But it felt very much, the pressure I was putting on myself was very much that of like, I kind of just feel like obligated. I don't feel a specific like stirring like you're supposed to do this. And in my head, it's like, this just seems impossible. I can't visualize myself becoming an apprentice, then going on and becoming a microchurch leader. I didn't want to like lose out on the community that I was a part of. And then last year around November, after our men's retreat, during ministry time after church, our friend Richard was here, and I remember it was just really, God really spoke to me through him, where he was saying, where I was like, I don't feel qualified, and it's like, I just don't feel like I can do this. And he was like, John, that's a lie. And because I wanted to disciple, but I just felt so unqualified. And he was like, that's a lie. And then I was like, I always felt bad because I was like, it's like I'm not part of a couple, so like I don't really want to go out and do this on my own. And he was like, it's like, that's totally fine. Like the disciples went out together like all the time. And he said, just start praying for a man or a couple to pair up with to do this. Like there's no shame in doing that. Or I felt it was kind of a deficiency. Like it's like, oh, I can't even do this on my own. And so I asked a few people to pray. I know I asked Jake, I asked Nate and Sarah, and I know Wade was praying, and Susan was praying too, I know, and other people. And there just was this shift where it was like, I'm actually kind of excited to do this. Like I want to disciple because that's what I'm supposed to be doing, and it's like I'm excited to do this, and I don't feel like I'm losing anything by doing that, and it just seemed less scary. And so after that happened in like at the beginning of December, Jake started praying, and then like a few months later or something, I was just in my heart, I was like, I think I'm supposed to ask Cameron if he would like to team up with like him and May. And so I did. And then at that time, I think it was your response was like, that'd be great, but there's not we need to see if there's an opportunity like for that. Like, is there a venue for that? And then a little bit after that, Cameron was like, hey, we're doing Alpha. And so teamed up with him and May and Marcy and Andy on that. And then as that was starting, I think there was the idea of, it's like, okay, well, let's make the apprenticeship like official. And it's like, and then so talked to Jake, and it was very much, it had become from a thing of obligation to like, I'm excited to do this. And it just felt like the timing was right. Like God was calling me into it. And there wasn't any, like, I had shame in that I didn't do it sooner. But then I realized that it's like, no, I was doing it in God's timing, and there's no shame in that. It was waiting on when he had orchestrated it.
That's cool. Yeah, I remember when John talked to us, I didn't know all this process was going on, and my answer was like not amazing for what he was looking for, because I was like, wow, that's a great idea. Like, I would love that, but we don't have any plans to start a microchurch, so I can't tell you for sure that that's going to happen. But if it does, I would like that. It's like, I think it was my answer, which was cool. And then it led to all kinds of stuff. But I remember that looking back, it's like, that's a great idea, and I like it. So it's cool. Thank you for your perseverance. I mean, that's a year-long, lifelong process too at the same time. So that's really cool. So for Jake, what does it look like to apprentice someone? Like, how did you do it? How did you approach it? Like, what are, like, for the microchurch leaders out there, like, what do you do when you apprentice somebody?
Yeah, and it was actually a little intimidating at first. Like, do you see, like, oh, I'm going to apprentice. That means I must know what I'm doing. And a lot of times I feel like I don't. So part of me, like, that's in me a lot of times too. And I feel like that when we do one-on-one discipleship type things as well. It's like, do I have a lot to give? Is this something that I have enough to share? I'm not really wired as a teacher, like as someone who would just talk for a really long time. And so I'm more of like a learn by doing type thing. Not that that's what teachers do. Sorry, you guys who teach, you just talk for a long time.
It's all just talking.
But I'm not wired that way. So part of that, there was like that hesitation in me of like, oh, do I have enough to give? But it was really great. Really on the app, on the MVVC app, there's a lot of helpful tools in there. So Cameron, as our pod coach, kind of walked me through a lot of this. Like, oh, here's some things you should do. There are some pieces on there about just to make sure that we're on the same page, have the basis of a biblical foundation and a theological foundation. So we go through those points, those areas, and just, okay, John, what do you think about salvation? You know, are you saved? Are you, like just the basic stuff. Now, the beauty is John and I have known each other like 24 years or something like that. So we go way back. There's a benefit there. But in some ways, that's also a detriment. If you know someone for a really long time, you just assume a lot of things. So it was good to have that tool to go through. To then connect together. Am I answering the question that you asked? I think so.
Yeah, like how are you approaching apprenticeship?
Yeah. So to have that tool in place to get started, and then really what we did was just set up meetings. We kind of settled on every other week or so, every 2 weeks, every 3 weeks, that we get together. For me, is before work. So it was like 7:30. John had come in, and we met in various locations around Muskingum when he lived in New Concord, and then now it's a little bit more of a commitment driving in from Zanesville. But we just meet, pray together, talk through some of these points, and then we'd also talk through kind of a plan for what we're going to be doing for Microchurch in the upcoming weeks as well. So that's kind of how we started it.
Cool. So there's some content piece, some like asking some good questions, figuring out some foundation stuff, but then there's a lot of like co-leading, just kind of working that out together.
Yeah, and that was a really helpful piece for me. So we've been leading groups, shared life groups, microchurches for quite a long time, but I've always kind of done it. It's been me and Beth, but I've kind of been leading a lot and kind of thinking of the ideas, and sometimes that's a little challenging. It's just one more thing to have to think through. And so that was a really cool benefit I wasn't expecting, is that John and I would get together, and John has great ideas. And so we just talk, hey, what do you think? And then we could share that not burden, but share that load of leading different aspects, and even the planning part of it and putting it all together. So for you leaders out there, I would encourage you to get an Apprentice. It's really cool. And it kind of makes it even more exciting, brings new life into everything as well. It's like, oh yeah, John's excited about this. There's a purpose for this that he's going to lead here eventually. It's really, really great in that aspect.
Yeah, that's cool, because it's easy to think about it as like, oh, I'm adding another obligation or commitment or meeting. It's like that's takes up margin and makes it difficult, but there's tons of benefits to the life of the group and seeing the things that you want to see and the changes, the things coming alive in you. It's really cool. John, how has this process prepared you as a leader? It doesn't have to be anything like crazy. It could be even really short, but like how's this kind of season prepared you? Has it prepared you? And if so, how has it?
Yeah, it has. It was really helpful to kind of to be intentionally apprenticing, because then it was nice, because then it wasn't kind of like just someone on the outside. It's like, okay, I want to help out, and that being intentional. Then it's like I knew Jake and I would be meeting, and it was neat to just, like, as we were meeting, because it's like then we could like debrief afterwards of like if I was like if I was unsure about how to do something, or if I felt like I wasn't doing a good job at something, just talk it out, and to have his encouragement, and just have Jake's pointers. I think it's been helpful to, it's like you get opportunities to try to facilitate, but then it's not like you're kind of out there on an island trying to do it by yourself. So it's really nice just to say, it's like, oh, I know Jake has my back, and I know it's not something where it's like we're in the microchurch, and if it's a time I'm facilitating, he's not like, oh, I'm not going to say anything, or anything like that. It's like, and so it's really helpful to just to do that as a team, because it's like when I look at, I think it makes looking to the future to plan a microchurch more feasible, because it's like, I don't have to do all this on my own. So it's cool to have an experience of like, to be learning from someone, because there's just so much to learn. And it's like, of just when you look at leading a microchurch, it's like, I'm just like, one of my weaknesses is this or this, and I really want to get better at this, and I need help with that. And so it's cool to be able to like just be open and say, it's like, hey, like I'm not great with facilitating this. Do you have any pointers? And can you help me do that, because I want to get better. It's like you can kind of come in through a perspective of like humility. It's like I've found it's very helpful to be, it's like I don't know how to do this, and there's a lot that I can be continually learning. And so it's just really helpful to approach that of like, hey, I don't have everything. I don't know everything. I'd like to move forward. Please help me move forward.
Cool. Yeah.
And I'll add a little on that too. Yeah. I think as a microchurch leader, I don't have to know everything either. And so, like, of course, we're relying on the Lord, but there are times I'm like, I don't know. Sometimes John would ask me questions, and I'm like, I don't know. But then Cameron is our pod coach. So, like, you see the little chart on the wall. Each microchurch is connected to a pod coach who kind of is check-in, and we go over some things together. Cameron asks some really great questions. We meet once a month or so. But he's a great resource for me, so that then I can go to Cameron and like, hey, I don't know how to do this. Do you have any pointers? And I know Cameron can go to Wade, and like there's just this really neat connection point, and Wade can go to the leaders in the vineyard, and like it's this connection. Why'd you laugh? That's good. Wade can go to Susan to ask additional questions. But really, like, I think there's something there, and I don't know if any of you have ever considered leading a microchurch, but something's holding you back. If that thing is, I don't feel like I'm ready, or I don't feel like I have all the answers, that's okay. There's a network of people who are here to support you, from the apprentice to the leader to the pod coach to the hub leaders. I mean, it's a really cool network connected together.
Yeah, that's a really great thing about small groups, about microchurches, is like, you don't have to be a rocket scientist to lead a great group if you have really good tools. But also, if you give yourself to it, you can spend your life learning how to do that better and better. Like, you will never run out of lessons to learn in leading groups. And so it's like, doesn't take a ton to get started, but there's so much depth there that you can continually be growing and not getting, like, you're not going to master it or things get old. So it's really cool to be connected to other people who are on that journey too, that you can learn from and benefit from the ways they do things. And I'm sure if you guys keep meeting, John has strengths that would rub off on you, and any two people who are leading will learn from each other. Mm-hmm. So John, how, your apprentice season is kind of coming to a close. How are you approaching a microchurch plant coming out of being an apprentice? And the way so we started like our microchurch plant in December, and we're giving it like a window of like, okay, we'll give it 3 months before we kind of call it an established microchurch, because just groups and communities, like you could call it a community from day one, but it's like, God hasn't really pulled everyone together. Like you haven't even had more than one meeting to see if anybody even comes back after the first time. It's like, let's give it some time before we start calling it a church, like a family or a group that God's pulling together. So right now we're in that window. We've gathered a handful of times, so we'll give it a little bit more time before we kind of do, like, maybe we'll pray for us, do kind of like a commissioning kind of thing on a Sunday, but we're in like a microchurch plant phase, which is operating completely like a microchurch. That's how we see ourselves, but we don't want to put the cart before the horse. Like, we want to make sure God's forming this community, which it really seems like He is at this point. I'd be surprised if it's not it doesn't kind of continue on as a microchurch. But John, how are you approaching that plant in that way as becoming an apprentice?
Yeah, I think it's for a lot of it is just leaning into God's like timing, and just almost like being along like for the ride. I've been completely surprised and amazed at how He's just orchestrated everything, from being able to learn from Jake, being able to learn from Cameron and May, going into Alpha. It just seemed like things were very much like just a progression. And so I know now it's like being in the microchurch plant with May and Cameron. There's so many times like where I'm just like through the process that God's been leading, where I'm just like, this just doesn't even seem real. Like, this is like wild, and I don't know how we got here. But it's like, I think it's been a cool progression to be like learning and leading together. Has helped been a stepping stone. Like, apprenticing has been helping prepare for then, like, and even having some overlap of doing that and being in a plant of helping prepare, as opposed to just going like if to jump right into like helping lead a microchurch plant. It would be, it's like, I don't have, I need more experience in it. So I think it's been like a gradual experience that's been helpful, and it's just seemed very, I think, natural of going from apprentice to kind of leaning into the plant. It feels very much like just like kind of God's natural timing as opposed to something that I'm orchestrating. Because I don't think I definitely wouldn't have been able to orchestrate this timeline of what's happening. I don't know if that answers your question super well.
Yeah, no, it's just about how you're approaching the plant. And so just seeing God's timing at work and moving into it without the pressure for it to be anything from the outset. And it's been cool to just take your hands off and watch him work and sit back and watch that.
It is, and it's a process, and it's just like all of it is like a learning process. Like from the apprenticeship to it's like, even though like then like being in a microchurch plant, it's like, oh, it's like you're still learning. Mm-hmm. It's just like just a continuum of learning where you start to feel more comfortable in doing some things, but then there's always skills in facilitating to grow in.
Yeah. Cool. I'll ask Jake a question. But before that, it's like, we call it apprenticeship, but really what it is, just to go back to kind of the beginning and boil it all down, is like, what we're talking about is it's discipleship in a specific way of discipling somebody to make disciples in a group setting, that's what a microchurch is. That's what apprenticeship is. It is a specific context of discipleship. So like we're saying, it's not a program, it's not a title, it's not anything flashy. It's like, this is just Jake discipling John and how to disciple people in a group setting. And that's what we're going big on. So Jake, my question for you is, in the past year, like, what are some of the changes you've seen in John? What are some of the encouraging things? What have you seen? What have you seen change, or especially since you started apprenticing? But I think it started back then with the Lord's process. But
that's a good question. So, like I said, I've known John for a long time. But what I've really noticed, like, John is a leader. We know him. He's a leader. But when there's a name placed saying you are a named leader, that then there was a shift, and John like stepped into that in a new way, in a different way that I haven't noticed before. That I don't know. There's a comfort level in that. To have new ideas and come forward with that. So as we're doing this together, we're co-leading this in this leader and apprentice role. That he's like, well, what about this? Have you thought about this? Have you doing this? So many really neat ideas that came out that I noticed. But yeah, our meetings together were very much, we'd start off with, how are you doing? How are things going in life? And how any cool stories you've got. Kind of like just any normal discipleship type conversation might go as well. So it's cool. It is, like I mentioned, it is some of the talking about what that week's microchurch is going to look like, or future plans, but as a personal discipleship tool as well. And I'd say both ways too. That John would ask the same questions of me, and it was that definitely iron sharpening iron type experience.
Yeah. I mean, you guys are peers in so many ways, but then there's also you're currently leading a microchurch. He wants to, so it's cool how all that. I'm sure it's a mess of different dynamics and stuff that you guys just do naturally because you just are friends and know each other. So that's really cool. And I think there's something to be said too of like, there's people who are, like you were saying, who are leaders who just lead by example or lead in so many different ways, like naturally of like, people respect them, people follow them, and it just kind of happens. But there's something to be said for recognizing a leader, and when God's making somebody a leader, and it has to be that way. I mean, we see it in the Bible. Like, God names leaders all the time. Like, he doesn't say it's unimportant. Like, he appoints people to offices. He calls out people for specific kinds of work, and the stepping into that role brings a lot of growth, and it lets people know how to interact with them, and it's like, there's confidence. You can have confidence in this role because everyone recognizes what God's doing there. So it's cool what you're saying, like, to see John step into a role that the Lord's preparing for him, and then learning how to have confidence in that and growing in that over time, which is something I feel like I've seen too. Like, it seems like it's a role that fits John really well. It's not like it's like he's wearing somebody else's armor. Like, it's been cool to see him grow into that. So, John, I've got one more question for both of you, because you guys have been answering a bunch of my questions before I even get there. So that's really good. We've got a lot of good stuff out of these guys so far. For each of you, what would you say to someone who's considering leading a microchurch at any point down the road? Just someday. Could be this year, could be in 10 years. But they see that in their future. Oh, I think I'd like to lead a microchurch someday. What would you say to somebody who's thinking about that?
I would encourage you to share that with someone. Maybe it's a friend or someone in your microchurch or the microchurch leader, just to kind of share it, to get it out there, to show that there's interest with no pressure of any timeline. And then for you to be praying and to ask for other people to pray for you. Because if God will answer those prayers and God makes things happen, you don't need to forge your own path into doing that. So I would say a big thing would just be praying personally and asking others to pray, because God puts those desires in our hearts. So when they start to surface, he's probably doing something, and the prayer is what is gonna change things. And then just when God is moving in that direction, if it takes a different turn from what you're expecting, go with it. Don't feel like it has to be like how you're looking at it, because probably there's a 99% chance that it's going to look differently than you think it's going to look, and it's going to take a different direction. And that's cool. It might seem scary, but once you're in it, it's cool. And just be free to just be in that journey, to not rush. It's like you can put all the pressure of the timing on God. He will, and he'll see that. Don't feel like you need to make things happen.
Is this the last question?
Same question.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good.
What would you tell someone?
So I'll just say I think this church is full of leaders. So that's part of the goal of our body, is to increase and grow and have more micro churches. So if you have any inkling that, I see what John's done, I could see myself stepping into that, I'd say the time is now. I mean, of course, pray, see if that's what the Lord wants to do. But I think it is. Take that step. And even if it's starting off small and just maybe leading a discussion or leading a portion of a micro church, kind of step in there. And if that seems like the Lord is in that, then okay, maybe we could try the apprenticeship thing. But I encourage you, all of you could be leaders. I mean, there's so much, like I mentioned, so many resources out there that Cameron and Wade have put together that there's really, it's not too overly difficult to lead a microchurch process. So anyway, I'd encourage you to do it. And I'd say for the leaders out there, the microchurch leaders that are out there now, keep your eyes open. So invite people into different portions of the microchurch, and keep your eyes out for apprentices. I know whenever this ends, I think maybe when it becomes a full microchurch, the plant that you have now, our apprenticeship will end, and it's been such a great experience that I'm going to have my eyes out for someone else to come and step in, so that we can grow and continue to plant more and more microchurches across the region. That's the goal.
Cool. Thanks. Well, I have an answer to that too. Something I'd like to say if you're thinking about doing a microchurch. So I think there's a lot to be said for having a sense of urgency with these things, like with the gospel, with leading groups, with helping to make disciples in a community. So I think we would all do well to have a little more urgency. I think in our culture we're really kind of driven and fast paced, but I think we're a little lax too with urgency at times. Like, oh man, there are people who need Jesus. There are people who are trying to follow Jesus who need help. There's all kinds of things. And so I think if you're thinking about doing it someday, I think you do well to move up your timeline for when you think you should be prepared to do that, of like, I should start getting ready now. Now, with that being said, I wanted to say it because what I would tell you too is like, there's urgency in preparing and for partnering with the Lord, but it happens on his time. If you read through the Bible, in the Gospels, he tells Peter, on this rock, who's going to build the church? Jesus will build his church, right? So don't start thinking that you plant a microchurch and you start a microchurch or you make a microchurch. That's something he does. Who adds to the number daily in the book of Acts? The Lord does. So it's a work of prayer. It's a work of what the Lord's doing. And in our experience with May and I and with John, it's like, all right, we want to lead a microchurch. We can't make that happen. So let's start praying and let's do some alphas. Like, let's start leading people to Jesus. Let's do what we can to let's start meeting with people and connecting with people. And it's like, we're not trying to make anything happen, but man, let's go after the Lord. Let's lead people to him and see what he does with that. So it's like we're putting our feet to our prayers. We're praying and we're moving in that direction. But we're also, at any point through that whole process, through the past 2 or 3 years, we could have tried to start a microchurch, and who knows how it would have went, but it wouldn't have felt the same as it does now when the Lord's doing it, and we're just coming alongside with what he's doing and how he's building it. But there's an urgency to start doing what it is that God's asked you to do, preparing yourself and preparing a people to be a community. And you can get ahead of him and just try to build it yourself. So it's a conflicting message. Go fast in preparing yourself and getting ready and connecting with people, but also tune into the Lord's time. That was something that I kept saying is I don't want to plant a microchurch unless it makes sense. That's what the Lord's doing and the people are there. And I don't want it built on my own effort, because then my own effort's going to have to keep it going. And that is a nightmare, people. Let me tell you that. Feeling like you have to keep something going. But when God's doing something, it's like, man, you just get to sit in it and enjoy it and do the things you've learned how to do. Do the things that you're learning about. Be the best leader you can. Keep growing. But it feels different when he's behind the wheel and you're learning how to better partner with him and how to lead well and get the most out of you and get the most out of the group. So I just want to say those things. So let's clap for these guys. They are disciple makers. They're the real deal. They are doing it. They're learning how to do it. They're stepping into it. And there's so many disciple makers here. But I think there's a lot to be said for stepping into that role as discipling a group of people, because it's more effective than one-on-one discipleship, because there's an impact of the whole life of a group. There's that support. You get to lean on one another. You get to care for each other. I could talk about microchurches for a long time and their benefits, but just encourage you. Think about being an apprentice. Think about asking somebody to be an apprentice. If you see leadership potential in them, it is a very life-giving process as these two, and it's not programmed. We're not trying to wrench control out of Jake's hands. It's we're trying to help him, help John, help other people be disciples of Jesus, which is just so much fun. So, Lord, I just thank you for these two. I thank you for all of the other apprentices, disciple makers, microchurch leaders, and future leaders, Lord. I just pray that your hand would be on them, that you'd be stirring their hearts to step into these roles. And God, that you'd just be showing them the times and seasons when the time's not right, when the time is right. Help them to start moving in that direction and revealing where you are and what you're doing and where you're moving and what your timeline is in those things. Amen. All right. Thanks, guys.